They thought Earth was harmless, an unremarkable blue speck drifting quietly in the galactic fringe, tagged in the records as low-priority biological civilization, pre-exploration stage. But that assumption collapsed the moment the translation engine froze on a single phrase. It happened aboard the Deep Space Intelligence vessel Axiom of Car, where the alien analysts processed human data streams the way predators dissected unfamiliar prey, carefully, clinically, expecting weakness to reveal itself in patterns. The room was dim, lit only by floating holographic scripts and rotating probability matrices. Every human broadcast, every intercepted document, every bureaucratic archive had been reduced to structured meaning. Until one line refused to behave like data. Mandatory retirement. At first, it seemed irrelevant, just another administrative ritual from an unimportant species obsessed with paperwork. The translator flagged it as a life cycle term, end of labor participation, transition to inactivity, social disengagement. Safe. Predictable. Harmless. Then the system attempted deeper contextual mapping. And the ship's core intelligence hesitated. Because hidden beneath that simple phrase was a staggering, almost irrational pattern: entire populations of humans trained in combat disciplines, strategic warfare, emergency response, covert operations, orbital navigation, cyber intrusion, survival medicine, were being systematically withdrawn from active duty, not because they failed, but because they had aged out of service. The holographic display expanded without command, as if the system itself was struggling to contain what it was seeing. Numbers cascaded through the air like falling ash. Veterans. Ex-Special Forces. Retired pilots. Former intelligence operatives. Tactical instructors. Crisis responders. And then the figure that silenced the chamber. 47,000,000 plus. Not soldiers currently active. Not conscripts. Not reserves under command structure. But individuals officially classified as inactive. Civilians. Citizens. Retired. The alien analyst responsible for Earth classification shifted uneasily in its harness. Inactive means non-combatant, it stated, attempting to stabilize interpretation. They are removed from operational capacity. But the system did not agree. It replayed intercepted human records, footage of elderly individuals dismantling violent threats with mechanical precision. Archived police reports where suspects described attackers who moved like trained units despite civilian appearance. Emergency footage of disasters where ordinary-looking retirees coordinated evacuations with frightening efficiency, as if they had done it 1,000 times before. The ship's atmosphere felt heavier now, though nothing physically had changed. Even the hum of the reactor seemed quieter, as if respecting an emerging threat it did not yet understand. Because Earth did something no other known civilization had ever done. It trained its killers, and then released them. Not into containment. Not into controlled military structures. But into homes. Into gardens. Into fishing docks and quiet suburban streets and public parks where children played without knowing what walked among them. The intelligence officer assigned to first contact felt a rare sensation crawl along its neural ridge, something close to uncertainty. Why would a species abandon its trained assets, it asked. No one answered. Because the deeper the system searched, the worse the implication became. These were not lost weapons. They were distributed ones. And somewhere between the calm blue image of Earth rotating on the main display and the silent recalculation of every threat model the galaxy had ever used, one conclusion began to form, slowly, unwillingly, like a door locking from the inside. Humanity did not keep its power in its armies. Humanity kept it in its retirement. On the orbital station Kepler's verdict, silence was never truly silence. It was engineered restraint, the kind that came from suppressing 10,000 overlapping systems, from filtering radiation chatter, ion drift, and the distant whisper of engines that never fully stopped speaking to space. Ambassador Sorin stood at the observation spine of the station, where reinforced glass curved like a judgmental eye over the blackness. Below, Earth rotated slowly in the void, blue oceans veined with cloud systems, continents glowing faintly with night grids, storms crawling like living scars across its atmosphere. From up here, it looked peaceful. Almost delicate. A world that had never needed to raise its voice. But the data never agreed with appearances. Behind Soren, the intelligence chamber was alive with floating holograms, rotating spheres of human demographic charts, cascading language models, and fragmented surveillance captures stitched together from intercepted planetary signals. Every few seconds, a new layer of analysis unfolded like a flower made of mathematics. The assignment had been simple at first: establish contact parameters, evaluate resource potential, classify military risk. Humanity had been tagged Tier 2 Emergent Civilization. Harmless enough. Until the update arrived. A single line of metadata expanded across the central display without request. Estimated retired combat-trained population, 47,000,000 plus. The number did not blink. It did not fluctuate. It simply existed, stubbornly stable, as if refusing to be interpreted as anything other than fact. Soren felt the shift before the room acknowledged it. A subtle recalibration in the station's ambient systems, the way airflow dampened, how even the holographic projections seemed to pause between refresh cycles. As if the station itself had begun reconsidering its assumptions. Clarify classification, Soren ordered, voice steady, though something beneath it tightened. The intelligence core responded instantly. Combat-trained designation includes former military personnel, security forces, emergency tactical responders, and certified defense specialists. A pause. Then another line unfolded beneath it, slower this time, almost hesitant in its presentation. Human systems categorize these individuals as retired. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have, like a translation that refused to settle comfortably into alien comprehension. Soren turned slightly, gaze narrowing. Retired implies removal from function. From capacity. Correct, the system confirmed. But even as it spoke, the holographic Earth data began to expand again on its own, unrequested correlations surfacing. Images of human infrastructure flickered, sprawling cities layered with emergency networks, subterranean bunkers disguised beneath civilian architecture, training simulations embedded into educational systems, disaster response protocols woven into cultural behavior like instinct rather than instruction. Then came the footage fragments. An elderly human crossing a crowded street stopping a violent altercation with precise, economical motion. A retired pilot guiding failing aircraft through storm turbulence using voice commands alone. A soft-spoken civilian coordinating hundreds during a collapse event with the calm authority of someone issuing battlefield orders. Each clip lasted only seconds, but the pattern was unmistakable. These were not passive beings. These were dormant systems. Soren stepped closer to the display, as if proximity could force clarity. The glass beneath Earth reflected faintly in their eyes, turning the planet into a layered illusion, beauty overlaid with something far less comforting. How many active command structures remain? Soren asked. None required, the system replied. That answer did not make sense. It should have triggered skepticism protocols, error checking, recursive validation. Instead, it opened a second file. And revealed something far worse. There was no single human military network to map. No unified chain of command to dismantle. No central authority that, if removed, would render the species defenseless. Instead, there were millions of independent nodes, trained, experienced, legally unrestricted individuals distributed across a planet that no longer considered them weapons, but citizens. Soren felt it then. Not fear exactly, but the early shape of it forming. The realization that their classification model had made a fatal assumption. That power must be active to exist. Below them, Earth turned quietly. Unaware, or perhaps entirely unconcerned, that somewhere above its sky, an alien intelligence had just begun to understand what retirement truly meant. The first anomaly was so small it almost didn't deserve attention. On the axiom of Carr, anomaly reports arrived constantly: statistical noise from drifting comets, misread gravitational echoes, misaligned translation artifacts from alien civilizations still too primitive to understand their own transmissions. Most were dismissed before they finished loading. But this one refused to decay. It began with a single observational feed from a lower atmosphere surveillance probe stationed over what human records labeled Suburban North America Sector 14. A quiet region. Green grids of housing clusters, intersected by roads that curved like veins around parks and schools. Nothing strategic. Nothing industrial. Nothing that should have triggered even secondary monitoring. The subject was classified as retired human male, age 68. He was performing what human logs identified as gardening. At first glance, it was unremarkable. The man knelt beside a patch of soil, tending plants arranged in neat, almost meditative rows. Sunlight filtered through leaves above him, casting shifting patterns across his hands. His movements were slow, deliberate, carefully adjusting stems, clearing debris, watering with a precision that suggested patience rather than urgency. The alien observation team almost dismissed the feed entirely. Until the probe detected the drone. A small surveillance unit, non-human origin, likely scavenger-class reconnaissance from a nearby corporate intelligence faction, had entered the airspace unnoticed. It drifted low, attempting passive data collection. Its presence was not loud, not aggressive. Just observant. The human did not look up. He continued tending the garden. Then, without breaking rhythm, he reached sideways and picked up a metal pruning tool. The drone descended another half-meter. And in that instant, the entire feed changed. There was no warning. No visible calculation. No hesitation. The man moved. Not fast in the way youth moves. Not chaotic. Something else entirely, compressed efficiency, as if time itself had been shortened around him. The pruning tool flicked upward once. A clean arc. The drone dropped out of the sky in two separate halves. For exactly 3 seconds, nothing else happened. Birds continued calling. Wind moved through leaves. The man resumed watering plants. Only now, the surveillance feed showed something new, the remains of the drone twitching faintly in the grass, its systems attempting delayed diagnostic recovery before shutting down entirely. On the axiom of Carr, the room went still. That was coincidental impact, one analyst suggested immediately. Probabilistic strike alignment due to uncontrolled tool motion. The system did not confirm. Because the anomaly count had already increased. New feeds auto-opened without command. A fishing vessel in a coastal human region. A retired individual aboard, handling nets with steady hands. A separate object, unidentified aerial probe, attempting low-altitude scan. The human paused. Looked up. And without ceremony, without visible tracking systems, adjusted the tension in the net lines in a way that redirected their trajectory through the air like guided restraints. The probe was caught, pulled down into water, and rendered inert before it could transmit a single alert packet. Another feed. A school facility. Emergency drill in progress. A retired instructor observing from the sidelines, arms folded. A simulated armed breach scenario begins. Within seconds, the instructor is no longer observing. The simulation ends prematurely. Not with chaos, but with controlled silence, as every simulated intruder is disarmed, redirected, or incapacitated using methods that do not violate human safety protocols. Each event alone was explainable. Together, they formed something else entirely. Pattern recognition algorithms aboard the station began struggling to categorize what they were seeing. Labels flickered between coincidence, trained reflex, environmental advantage, and unknown behavioral adaptation. But beneath the technical confusion, a deeper unease spread through the crew. Because none of these humans reacted like civilians discovering danger. They reacted like systems that had already accounted for it. Soren watched the feeds accumulate, each one more unsettling than the last. Not because of violence, but because of effortlessness. There was no escalation, no emotional spike, no visible transition from normal to alert. It was as if danger, for them, was not an interruption. It was a familiar variable. And somewhere deep in the station's predictive core, a silent recalculation began forming a new hypothesis, one no one had yet dared to voice. What if Earth did not respond to threats? What if it had already been responding, long before anyone noticed it was under observation? The revelation did not arrive like a message. It arrived like a fracture. It began in the middle of a routine data sweep, just another archival interception pulled from outdated Earth broadcasting channels. The kind of cultural material analysts usually filtered for noise, documentaries, interviews, human storytelling fragments preserved in redundant satellite storage. Soren almost didn't authorize the playback. But something about the file signature felt intentionally preserved. Not encrypted. Not hidden. Simply kept, as if humanity expected someone, someday, to look closely enough. The chamber dimmed as the archive opened. A human appeared on screen, older, seated in what looked like a modest recording studio. No military insignia. No official backdrop. Just soft lighting, a neutral expression, and the faint hum of a civilization that had stopped trying to impress the universe. The subtitle translation rendered his words into the station's standard galactic syntax. People always ask what happens when soldiers retire, the human said, almost amused. Like there's a clean separation. Like we just stop being what we were. A pause. A small breath. The kind humans took when they were about to say something they considered obvious. We don't. The room on Kepler's verdict tightened. Soren leaned forward without realizing it. The human continued, tone casual, dangerously casual, as if discussing weather patterns instead of existential military doctrine. Combat doesn't end when service ends. It just changes context. You stop wearing the uniform. You stop taking orders. But what you learned, that doesn't disappear. The archive cut briefly to supplementary footage, elderly humans in everyday environments. A woman repairing infrastructure systems during a city outage with precise, almost surgical familiarity. A man calmly guiding evacuation routes during structural collapse, speaking in short, efficient commands that people obeyed without question. Another human diffusing an armed confrontation without ever raising their voice above conversational tone. Then back to the speaker. We don't retire killers, he said. A faint smile. We let them rest. The translation struggled with that sentence. The system attempted multiple interpretations: deactivation, dormancy, non-operational status. None matched the emotional weight embedded in the human cadence. Soren felt something shift in their understanding, but it was not yet fully formed. Not yet dangerous. Then came the next line. And not all of us were soldiers. The statement should have reduced the threat classification. Instead, it expanded it. The human leaned slightly forward, as if addressing not just the camera, but the future observer. Emergency responders. Disaster engineers. Search and rescue units. Aviation instructors. Cybersecurity specialists. Medical trauma teams. People trained to function when everything breaks at once. The archive overlaid statistical data as he spoke, Earth systems automatically categorizing professions, training hours, certification intensities. It was supposed to be reassuring. Organized specialization. Civil infrastructure. But the numbers refused to feel civilian anymore. Because each category carried the same underlying pattern: repeated exposure to controlled crisis, structured violence against entropy, rehearsed survival under catastrophic conditions. And then the final revelation dropped, not stated, but implied through an expanded classification file that the archive system accidentally exposed. Legal operational autonomy in declared planetary emergencies. Soren froze. That line did not translate cleanly into any known galactic governance model. The human on screen continued speaking, unaware of the collapse happening in interpretation layers light-years away. "If something threatens the whole system," he said gently, "we don't wait for permission." The archive ended. Silence returned to the chamber like a pressure seal locking into place. But the damage was done. Because the galaxy had assumed Earth's retired population was passive, inactive, disconnected from authority structures. What it had just discovered instead was something far more precise, and infinitely more unsettling. Humanity had not merely trained its experienced operatives. It had embedded in them a conditional authority override tied not to rank, not to command, not to survival, but to recognition of existential threat. Soren slowly turned back toward Earth's holographic projection. The blue planet no longer looked peaceful. It looked like a system waiting for the correct trigger. And somewhere in the quiet of alien understanding, the question changed shape. Not how many humans can fight, but who decides when they all do. The moment the alien fleet crossed the threshold of Earth's outer defense envelope, nothing happened. No warning sirens. No planetary broadcasts. No visible mobilization of orbital weapons. Just silence, vast, deliberate, and almost insulting in its calm. The Helios Accord Armada, 12,000 vessels strong, advanced under the doctrine of controlled intimidation. Their formation was flawless, geometric, designed to project inevitability. Energy signatures pulsed like restrained storms behind their hulls. Translation beacons broadcast peace-formulated commands on every known frequency. They expected confusion, fear, negotiation. Instead, they received a single acknowledgement ping from Earth's deep communication grid. Unrecognized planetary incursion detected. And then, nothing more. For exactly 11 seconds, the alien commanders believed this meant compliance. A primitive delay. A bureaucratic processing lag. Then the planet answered. Not with a centralized command. Not with a flag. But with activation. Across Earth's surface, encrypted civilian channels, long dormant, buried beneath commercial noise and forgotten infrastructure layers, lit up simultaneously. Not as broadcasts, but as recognition events. Old systems waking up not because they were activated, but because they had been waiting to recognize something worth waking for. In suburban homes, in mountain villages, in coastal towns where the ocean never stopped speaking against the shore, human devices that had been considered obsolete suddenly displayed a single line. Unrecognized threat proximity exceeded threshold. And beneath it, status, civilian override authorized. There was no alarm sound. No panic protocol. Humans did not need one. They understood immediately. A retired orbital pilot in a quiet desert region stepped outside, looking up at the sky as if he had been expecting a specific weather pattern his entire life. He did not speak. He simply walked toward an old hangar that had not opened in years. A former crisis coordinator in a dense metropolitan zone closed a book, placed it neatly on a table, and said only, "So it's that kind of day again." A retired cyberdefense architect stared at her kitchen wall for 3 seconds, then smiled faintly, as lines of forgotten access protocols resurfaced in her mind like muscle memory. And somewhere, across millions of homes simultaneously, the same realization echoed through human thought without being spoken aloud. Not again. Or finally. Or at last. Just recognition. The alien fleet began its peaceful containment landing sequence, deploying non-lethal suppression fields designed to disable planetary communications and enforce compliance without destruction. Blue-white grids unfolded across Earth's upper atmosphere like a net meant to catch a living thing. It worked flawlessly, for exactly 4 minutes. Then Earth's atmosphere reorganized itself. Not physically. Not violently. Structurally. Air traffic systems, long integrated into civilian infrastructure, rerouted thousands of dormant atmospheric craft. Emergency response satellites, decommissioned by every galactic standard, recalibrated their orientation. Coastal monitoring stations began emitting coordinated timing pulses that synchronized with old human navigation protocols the galaxy had never bothered to decode properly. And then the retired pilots began to fly. Not military fleets. Civilian aircraft. Modified. Repurposed. Quietly maintained for decades under the assumption they would never be needed for anything beyond transport, training, or ceremonial flights. Now they moved like a language being spoken fluently for the first time in years. At the same moment, planetary communication grids stabilized, not under alien control, but under human familiarity. Networks the invaders had tried to suppress simply shifted to alternate routing paths designed long ago for catastrophic infrastructure loss. There was no chaos. Only redirection. In orbit, alien sensors began to report an impossible reading. Earth was not resisting their presence. It was absorbing it into a pre-existing system of response. And then came the moment that shattered their tactical certainty. Every retired human with any relevant operational history received the same transmission, not from Earth Command, not from government authority, but from a distributed recognition layer embedded in civilian systems themselves. Unidentified incursion class, planetary scale. Civilian response authorization, confirmed. No orders followed. None were needed. Because somewhere deep in the quiet architecture of humanity, there had always been an assumption the galaxy never understood. That one day, something would arrive that did not belong. And when it did, the ones who had already lived through chaos would not ask permission to end it. In orbit, the alien commander finally spoke what none of them wanted to compute. This is not a defense response. A pause. This is distributed readiness. Below them, Earth did not ignite. It remembered how to function under war conditions. And began. The alien fleet withdrew after 11 hours, but not in the way victories are usually recorded. There were no shattered hulls drifting in orbit. No burning wreckage spiraling into Earth's atmosphere. No triumphant broadcasts or victory declarations from humanity. In fact, from a purely tactical perspective, almost nothing visible had happened at all. And that was what terrified the galaxy most. On the command bridge of the Helios Accord flagship, systems ran continuous post-engagement diagnostics, attempting to reconcile expectation with outcome. Earth had not deployed a singular defense grid. No planet-wide weapon discharge. No coordinated planetary fleet engagement. And yet every single attempt at sustained orbital dominance had collapsed into irrelevance. Not destruction. Redirection. Containment protocols that were never explicitly triggered but still executed. Communication interference that wasn't interference at all, just millions of civilian systems choosing alternate pathways the invaders could not predict. Atmospheric adjustments that weren't defensive maneuvers, but routine human infrastructure reasserting itself under stress conditions it had been quietly designed to survive. It was as if Earth had not fought them. It had processed them. And then decided they were no longer important enough to remain. When the withdrawal order was finally issued, it did not come with relief. It came with confusion so deep it bordered on existential collapse. Entire alien command structures spent the last hours of engagement attempting to identify a central node, a command center, a leadership hub, a single point of failure that, if neutralized, would explain everything. There was none. There had never been one. Earth was not a sphere. Not a sword. Not even a shield. It was a distributed reflex of 7 billion lives, most of whom had once been trained, directly or indirectly, to respond when systems failed. And systems had just failed on a planetary scale. Back on Kepler's verdict, Ambassador Sorin stood alone in the observation chamber, staring at the final fleet transits as they slipped back into faster-than-light corridors. The holographic Earth still rotated below, unchanged. Beautiful. Quiet. Almost indifferent to what had just occurred in its orbit. The report terminal blinked once. Then finalized itself. No input required. Sorin read the conclusion slowly, as if each word was resisting translation. Humanity does not maintain an active standing military as primary defense doctrine. A pause. The system recalculated, phrasing confidence. Then continued. Primary defense doctrine is the preservation and reactivation of distributed civilian capability under existential threat conditions. Sorin exhaled, but it did not feel like breathing. It felt like acknowledging something too large to fully compress into thought. 47 million retired combat-trained individuals. But that number had been a misunderstanding from the beginning. Because it had never been about how many were trained. It was about how many remembered what training meant when it mattered. Behind Sorin, the station's analysts remained silent, each one replaying fragments of the engagement in loops they could not resolve into victory or defeat. There was no battlefield to study. No front line to reconstruct. No decisive moment to isolate. Only millions of small, ordinary actions that had collectively erased the concept of alien superiority without ever acknowledging it existed. Sorin finally spoke, voice low. Did they even notice they were at war? No one answered. Because the truth was beginning to settle like a weight across every surviving transmission, every recalculated model, every rewritten doctrine across the galactic network. Humanity had not defended Earth. It had simply allowed its dormant systems to function again. And in doing so, it had demonstrated something the galaxy was not prepared to classify. A civilization where peace was normal. But readiness was permanent. As the last alien ship vanished into the dark between stars, one final observation update propagated across every surviving intelligence network. Planet classification revised, non-hostile. Then a second line appeared, added not by command, but by consensus failure of every predictive model that tried and failed to simplify what it had witnessed. Do not assume non-hostile means non-responsive. And somewhere beneath a quiet sky, Earth continued turning, calm, ordinary, and waiting for nothing at all, except the next mistake that would require it to remember what it had always been capable of becoming.